Welcome back to Broken Dolly TV. I'm Gypsy, and I previously showed you guys how I made over this doll, whom I named Daphne, by rooting this crazy wild red hair in her head to reflect her chaotic personality. I also showed y'all her kit sister, Aurelia, to whom I gave some synthetic braiding hair to pull off this textured straight hair look. But many of you asked me to show my process of rooting from start to finish, so I decided to save the last doll in this Barbie Basics You Create kit to show you guys step by step what I do. If you like Barbie related content designed for adult collectors, then this is the place to be. You should know who I am. I'm Gypsy, so make sure you're subscribed so that you can get to know me better and come hang out with us over here with the pretty people who love to talk about dolls. What I like to do firstly is to draw on a tentative hairline for the doll. This doll I named Aniston. I decided I want her to have a bit of a widow's peak. I wanted a hairline that's not like a lot of the other dolls that I already have. Her head shape was the most difficult for me to draw on a hairline for. Out of the 3 dolls that came together in this kit, I used pencil for this step so I can erase and fix the lines if needed, and I really did end up erasing a lot working on this girl. Finally, I got a rough idea, and what helps me a lot to do this is to use male dolls to kind of use as a reference for the hairlines on my girl dolls. The next step is to go over the hairline by using a paint that matches the hair that I'm going to use for the rooting. I could not find my brown paint at the time. Of course, it turned up when I was done with this project, but that doesn't matter. The black color is close enough since the hair that I'm using for her is going to be very dark. I'm sourcing the hair from other dolls that aren't actively a part of my display doll collection. They're just reject parts. I like the texture of the hair, and I want to have a thick, full textured hair look for this doll. I imagine her character to be an Egyptian girl who's mixed with all sorts of black African ancestry far back in her family tree, and closer in her family she has more Middle Eastern roots, which is where she gets her facial features from, but I wanted the blackness to come out in her hair texture, you feel me? So that's my vision for this doll. I'm going to try to paint on the hairline of her hair very close to the lines that I created with the pencil. The perimeter needs to be very accurate, so I do this slowly and evenly, although it's really hard to do this on camera. I'm so bad at making tutorials, you guys. I'm using the cheapest of acrylic paints that you can find at your local big box stores like Walmart that carry art supplies. I only need the perimeter to be very accurate. The rest of the scalp doesn't really matter because the hair is going to cover it, so it can be sloppy. Now, the great thing about this method is that if midway through your project you change your mind and you want to give this doll a different hair color, you can go right over the paint with a new color. You're not just stuck with whatever color you choose. You see I left a little blank column in the middle of her scalp here. That's to give myself a bit of a guideline for where I want to root her parts. I contemplated giving this doll some long sleek hair because I think it would look really great on her, but because I have a very specific character in mind for her, I'm using this crimply hair from a doll that I don't really need, and I'm using a rooting tool to do this. Now you can buy these things already put together. They're called felting needles, which reborn doll artists use to root baby doll heads. Mine is one that I made using the handle of an X-Acto knife and replacing the blade with a sewing needle that I clipped at the loop to give me a hook where I'm going to secure the hair. The DIY method, of course, is cheaper, but if you really don't have the crafting skills, you can definitely buy a felting needle to get the job done. The mistake I made with this doll is that I didn't use my smaller needle around the perimeter of her hair like I usually do, because my vision is extremely impaired right now thanks to a bunch of strokes that I experienced, and I didn't realize that I was using the bigger rooting tool. So that's what I would have done differently so that her hair around the front parts of the doll's head would have smaller plugs. But I didn't realize it at the time until I was way farther into this project, so it is what it is. I can work with it nonetheless. So the next step is to have some water handy to keep the plugs of hair together. As I work, I'm going to cut off hair from the reject doll's head, apply a little bit of water, and then I'm going to fold the hair weft into the notch on the needle and pull it tightly so that it's ready to root. You're gonna see me folding the hair at an uneven part of the weft because I'm not sure what length I need the hair to be at first. So this first plug is experimental, just trying to see where I need the hair to land on the doll. And as I'm looking at the doll, because I want her hair to be a bit past her shoulders but not drastically long, I decided to remove the plug and refold the hair. So after we establish a point where we want to fold the hair, which is going to be somewhere near the middle of the weft, I'm going to repeat this process and do the plugs around the perimeter of her head. I'm going to start with the perimeter to make sure that her hairline looks how I need it to look, but there's really no right or wrong way to do this. If you are more comfortable starting at the back and working your way up, you can do it like that. If you would rather start the rooting at the parting lines and fill the rest of the hair in after, you can also do it that way. There are no rules. I don't even do it the same way for every doll that I'm rooting. It really depends on the style that I'm going for, where I might start rooting the head. Now I'm just establishing the pattern that I want to follow, following the lines that I drew around her hairline. I also want to point out that I fill the scalp with paint all the way up to the hairline's edge because I don't want to see her skin color under the hair when I part her hair. But some people don't do it like this. If you look at most of your Barbie dolls, even Mattel starts the scalp coloring a few rows back behind the first row of hair plugs. This is entirely up to you what you prefer to do, but I'm just showing you my method. I think this face would look really pretty with a side swooped bang as well. The sky is the limit with these dolls, but when I spend time rooting dolls, since I don't enjoy doing this, I try to make the doll stand out in her own way and do something a little different for the hair if I can. I also want to emphasize that sourcing hair from dolls you already have is a good way to save money and recycle if you don't want to go out of your way to purchase new saran or whatever kind of hair you want to use. As I do this, I try to use the directional rooting technique to plant the plugs in the direction that I prefer the hair to lay when it's set later. This is something that professional reborn artists do to create swirl patterns in the crown of a baby doll's head, and to make it easier to brush that swirl in place, my focus is to try to plug the hair close around the hairline. Again, if I had the right size needles, I could have gotten my holes closer together while using less hair per plug. But I didn't even realize that I was making this mistake at the time. So when y'all do this, don't be like me, pay attention to your needle size. When I'm done with this process, I'm going to end up trimming some of her hair because it will be uneven at the ends, but that's okay. My goal is to have her hair looking like it grew to a natural length and not like she had a haircut. Now let me just explain right quick if you're wondering why I keep talking about needle sizes. When I root doll hair, I usually use a smaller needle to do the perimeter of the doll's head where I can get smaller hair plugs closer together so that there's not a bunch of big gaps and the hair is not too thickly rooted at the hairline. Once I've established the perimeter of the hair, and I usually go back to the front and do like 2 or 3 lines behind that first row with that small needle. And then after I do that, I'll use the bigger needle, the one you see me using here, in order to plug up the rest of the hair where the holes don't have to be so close together. You can kind of separate them farther apart. And for those holes, because the needle is bigger, I can use bigger chunks of hair in the wefts. So that's going to fill the doll's hair up very fast. And this is why I use this method, because I am not patient enough to be taking days and days to root a doll's head. I want to do it all in one sitting, and it only takes me maybe 1 or 2 hours to get a whole head rooted doing it this way. Now this method I'm using locks the hair in place because when the needle is pushed into the head and pulled out, the hair just stays stuck in the hole that we created. Gypsy, how do you know her hair won't fall out when you brush it? Good question. I can glue seal the hair on the inside of her head and be done with those worries, but I'm lazy and impatient. I want to style this doll's hair immediately after I'm done, so I'm going to boil set her hair instead to style it when we're done, and after the scalp cools down, the holes in her scalp are just going to shrink around the hair plugs, which is going to keep the hair in place. Now that does not mean I'm gonna rake through her hair with a comb, because if I do that, I probably will end up pulling out some hair. But once her hair is set, it's not likely that I'm gonna do a bunch of complicated styles, so I shouldn't have to worry about this. Most of my dolls don't get complex hairstyles because I don't like for the hair fibers to be dented from elastic bands and high ponytails. Once in a while, I might do a nice hairstyle for a certain look that I'm going for, but that's not really often. And Aniston here has a whole backstory that I'm cultivating for her. She's not really somebody who's preoccupied with fancy hairstyles. She almost doesn't know what to do with her hair because despite being very gorgeous, she doesn't have the time or patience to spend a lot of time grooming her hair in the mirror. She has a very basic casual style, and I want her hairdo to reflect her personality. Now, this doll's head can be removed really easily, and that would probably make things easier for me as I'm doing this, but for the sake of the video, I'm just going to keep her on her body. Now, even though these easy swap neck pegs that were introduced with this line of dolls have seemingly revolutionized head swapping for us customizers, I realized we can modify our doll's neck pegs ourselves and have the exact same functionality as the easy swap pegs do that Mattel makes. So if you're interested in learning how to give your dolls that feature, be sure to check out my easy tutorial. Just have it in the back of your head as a future project that you might want to take on once you see how simple it really is. I haven't seen a tutorial to do this anywhere, so I don't know if mine is the only one. But if you don't subscribe to this channel, I promise you will forget after watching tons and tons of videos on DollTube who it was that had a tutorial like this if you ever need it in the future. So make sure that you are subscribed so you don't miss out on useful tutorials like this that I post here. Check the description box for the link that will take you over to that tutorial. Now I'm going to plug in the hair that is going to be the starting point of her center part. And the plug is going to be split down the middle so that the hair lies flat on each side of her head. I'm going to continue this process to the opposite side until this entire outline of the head is rooted. Now we're back with her perimeter rooted, and we want to make sure that the widow's peak is obvious. I did a few more plugs to establish the part line in the middle. You can see there are spots where the paint is chipping, and that's just because the rooting tool I'm using is made of metal and it's scraping the paint, but it doesn't really matter because you're not going to see that when her hair is done. Just remember, if you choose to use something other than paint to tint your doll's scalp, stay away from markers. Permanent inks do not get along well with doll vinyl, and it may bleed from the area where you're drawing it on, so you've been warned, homie. Now that her hair is rooted, I'm just gonna keep plugging away until her entire head is covered with hair. In this demonstration, I plugged way too much hair in the front half of the head, mainly because I started rooting with the wrong needle and I didn't realize my mistake until it was kind of too late. But when she's finished, you're going to see that her hair is really big in the front. The great thing about not sealing the hair with glue inside the scalp is that these kinds of mistakes can be corrected easier because I can just pull the plugs out and redo them. I might end up doing this later on. I haven't really made up my mind, but it's not a big deal to me that her hair is very full, so it's whatever. But I do want to point out these adjustments that I would have made so that you can learn from my mistakes and you don't have to make them on your own. These UCreate dolls are kind of expensive. They're $100 a pop for a set of 3 dolls, and don't nobody want to make permanent mistakes on these dolls with bougie price tags. So I thought I was going to need 1.5 donor dolls to fill her head with enough hair, or even 2 heads, but as I'm working, I realized that one head seems to have a ton of hair on it and I might not need to use more than 1 donor. The doll that I'm stealing the hair from does have a much bigger head size than Aniston, and the hair is densely rooted. So if you steal hair from a doll with a similar head size to a typical Barbie, you might need to use more than 1 doll's head worth of hair because of the shedding as you're working. But for Aniston here, wetting the wefts of hair really did keep everything neat, and I had only a small amount of shedding hair to throw away at the end. So it really worked out great. You might find hair on a doll like Monster High or Ever After High that you want to use for a Barbie's head, and in that case, 1 head might be enough hair to work with. Now let's check in with our progress so far. We're not quite done, but at this area of the head, you can spread the plugs farther apart because it's in the back and nobody's really gonna see it. And this doesn't have to be done in any particular pattern. I just try to make the plugs in like a zigzaggy kind of pattern so that the plastic of the scalp doesn't have a bunch of holes next to each other to make it cave in on itself. Because sometimes if you plug holes right next to each other, all in like the same even looking rows, it can make the plastic weak and the scalp might have like rips in it. I probably said this in a really confusing way. Just run back this part of the video, and if you slow the speed down a little, I promise it's gonna make sense. Ain't nobody doing all of that, Gypsy. How about you just make sense the first time you tell us something? Okay, I agree, but like I said, I literally have dead parts of my brain thanks to the wonderful series of strokes that I had without even realizing it a couple months ago. And ever since then, my mind gets jumbled so much easier and my words don't come out sounding how I think they should when I'm forming them in my mind. But y'all smart, you know what I'm trying to say. Alright, pretty people, Aniston is now in her Tina Turner era, and we are done rooting her head, but we're not done styling her hair. So the next thing I shall do is use boiling hot water to not only set the scalp so that the holes will shrink up, but also to tame her hair a bit so that she doesn't look like she has been electrocuted. Now once the water is boiled, I'm just gonna pour the water over her head before dunking her head all the way into the water in the bowl. Why are you doing that, Gypsy? Well, good question, and the answer is, why not? Also, I think running the water directly over the roots make the hair sit closer to the head. I could be wrong. It could be my OCD, but we're never gonna know the answer to this question because I'm just gonna pretend it's true. After we run the water over her head, we let her sit in the boiling water for a little bit. This hair texture I use is originally straight hair that Mattel just kind of like crimpled up with whatever technique they use. So the boiling water won't make the hair straighten back out. But if I decide to use a flat iron on this hair, I'm sure that the hair is gonna straighten out. Now, I don't want to do that. I want Aniston to keep the relaxed, kinky, straight kind of texture that this has, so I won't be pressing a heat tool through the length of this hair. But instead, I'm going to primarily use hot water to flatten it as much as I can. After we do this step, you can see the hair in the back looks like it's just falling at a natural length and not like a deliberate haircut, and that's what I'm going for. Once her hair is dry, I'm going to touch up her edges with some baby hairs next. So now that her edges are done, when her hair is tied back in the front, it's going to soften up her hairline a little bit. I used watercolor pencils to do this, but later I plan to go back over it with acrylic paint to make the hairs more permanent. The length of her hair as it is will allow me to tie up the hair if I want to, but I'm not planning to do that. Aniston's edges in the back are kind of sloppy because you can see a bit of the paint that's shading her scalp in between the plugs. But for a doll whose hair will stay down for most of the time, this doesn't really matter. If it bothers me, I'm just gonna scrape off the paint around those back edges and clean it up with no problem. Here are some clips of the hair fully dry. I love the way that this turned out, and it really looks like what I would expect from a lady with the ethnicity that I want to portray for this character. When I pulled back her hair in the front to get a look at her hairline, I did appreciate that finished look, but I see why I was having a hard time giving her a proper hairline at first. Her forehead is massive. I could bring her forehead in more by rooting more hair in, but I cannot be bothered. I could also give her some bangs to cover the forehead more, but at the moment, I think there's a little charm to her massive forehead look. It makes her feel more realistic to me. You ever meet a woman who is absolutely drop dead gorgeous, but has like one particular flaw? A crooked tooth, an uneven eyebrow, a cluster of moles on her face, or giant ears? Something about the imperfection makes you appreciate her beauty even more. It's the kind of flaw that balances out the unbelievable level of natural beauty that this woman has. I love it when I come across this and the person to me feels more human and relatable and less like some unattainable goddess to be worshipped by the lowly peasants. You know what I'm saying? So in the end, I just curled in the very ends of Aniston's hair to make them look a little bit neater, but it's very subtle, you can hardly tell, and overall I'm satisfied with her new look. You may see her with updated changes to her hair as I continue perfecting her look to bring out her personality, so make sure you're subscribed if you want to see more of Aniston in future videos. Now, all 3 of my You Create Barbie Basics dolls from kit number 1 have some hair rooted in their heads, and they never ever have to see those dreaded wigs that they came with again. These dolls can only be purchased at Mattel Creations website, which is a pain in the arse to deal with, and I only buy dolls directly from Mattel if I have no other option. Usually, I go to Amazon, Walmart, Target, eBay, and other trusted websites online to source my vast doll collection. If you're interested in finding some of the dolls that I feature on my channel, or even dolls that I don't have but you might like, I've got some selections curated for you over on my Amazon storefront. Check the description box for the link to my Amazon store, and you can also find that on my channel About section along with my eBay listings, as I'm currently downsizing my insane collection. My loss is your gain should you choose to take some pretty plastic off my hands. I told you in my previous upload, I don't generally share my eBay listings with the doll community because I don't like going back and forth with people to make sales. I don't have the attention span for that, and it's not really something us autistic people are good at. So I like eBay because the people who buy my stuff, they don't know me. If they want something, they just get it and don't have a whole side discussion prior to the purchase. Of course, I'm always happy to answer questions, but I'm not gonna research which body would match a specific head that I listed when there's 5 people all asking me this at the same time. And this is kind of something I have to deal with when I'm dealing with people who know me in the doll community. I just cannot be bothered. So to make up for that, I usually make my listings really detailed, and I try to share information about the item that any typical collector might wonder about. If you take a look at my product links, you're going to find yourself over on Walmart or Target's website usually, where you can also find amazing dolls, fashion packs, and even display and storage supplies that I mentioned as well. So other than checking out my links, the easiest way for you to support my channel is to watch my videos like you're doing right now. Share these videos in your doll communities on whatever forums you guys like to hang out on. Thank you so much for hanging out with me as I brought Aniston here to life. She's my favorite sculpt of the 3 dolls that came together in this collection. I'm Gypsy and you're not. Let me give you a second to get over it. You good? Okay. Now you should try to have a dolly day.